all the other for all the other tree-based analysis. So this talk will be separated into two parts. So the first part will be talking about math, and so what's the definition of the polynomial, and so this polynomial is a graph polynomial, and the second will be I'll be talking about some applications of this polynomial. All right. So the first part is I'll be talking about the definition of a polynomial and its properties and all the good things on why we like it. Right. So it is a graph polynomial, and it is defined recursively, like showed in this picture. So now if we have if we know the polynomial of all the child subtrees T1, T2, and T3, Tk here, so all we need to do, what we're doing is just multiply the polynomials of these subtrees and then plus y. So we can see some examples in the first page here. So if it is just one node, it is just x. So for now, we're talking about rooted trees, and then we're going to generalize this to unrooted ones. So and if we're talking about a path, like the second the second graph on the top, the second tree on the top, so if we have x plus y, and if we have a cherry, which is the third tree on the top panel, would be x cubed. X squared plus y. So basically, what we do is just multiply all the polynomials on the lower level and then plus y. So if we take a look at the biggest example here, what we do is just for the left part, we do x cubed plus y, and the right part is the cherry, so it's x squared plus y. And for the whole tree, what we do is x cubed plus y times x squared plus y and then plus y. So it's a simple, very simple recursive definition. So in this case, we can assign a tree. Once we have a tree, we can assign it a graph polynomial in this way. All right, so we need to define some terminology here. So I think for leaf or a tip is a common word for the leaf vertices in the tree. And for phylogenetics, we have another important definition that is called a clade. That is a word borrowed from biology. And the clade is as a rooted tree that is a subtree comprising an internal node and all its descendants. So basically, we just pick one internal node and include all its descendant. That is called a clade. That subtree is called a clade. All right. So some properties about this polynomial is that we can interpret it. We can interpret these the terms in the polynomial. Say we have a c times x to the power of alpha and y to the power of beta term. So that actually means there exists c ways to choose beta clades and alpha leaves such that they cover all the trees. We'll explain. I'll explain what it means. So for example, here we have a if we factor these polynomial, we'll have a x to the fifth. That's the leading term there that represent we're picking all the leaves. We have 5 leaves in this tree, and in this case, we're talking about the y square term, and the y square term corresponds to we're picking 2 clades that cover all the leaves of the tree. And if you can think about it, we can choose x square y term. That means we can pick a y on the left and x square on the right clade. So this is basically saying it can actually be proved that each term corresponds to a choice of such such combination of clades and leaves. Okay, so here here's another example, and the corollary is saying that there exists a one-to-one correspondence between the monomials x to the alpha and y to the beta at any monomials in the polynomial rooted tree and to the choice of clades and leaves. So in this case, we have two ways to choose x squared y. We have two ways to choose two leaves and one clade, and one is labeled in red here, and the other one is its mirror image. So we choose a y on the left and choose 2x on the right. So that gives us 2x squared times y. And why is this polynomial? Why do we like this polynomial? Because this polynomial a spoiler is just that this polynomial has a one-to-one correspondence to the tree topology or to the unlabeled trees. Well, to prove that, it's actually a quite intuitive proof, and so we're basically just proving that these polynomials are irreducibles. So the polynomials are irreducibles in z, x, y. And to prove that, it is based on its definition, it's like really straightforward. We basically just use Eisenstein's criterion. So the Eisenstein's criterion is saying that if we have D is an integral domain and we have a prime ideal, and as long as the coefficients of these polynomials satisfy the three conditions, so that the leading coefficient is not in the prime ideal, and all the other coefficients are in the prime ideal, and the constant term is not in the prime ideal square, then we can say the polynomial is an irreducible in this integral domain, which is basically like saying that that the polynomial is like a prime number in integers, right? So if we take a look at our polynomial, we can find several properties which can be proved, but I'm not going to prove it here. So the leading coefficients always corresponds to the choice of all the leaves. So it's x to the power of number of leaves. In this case, we have 4 leaves, so it's x to the 4. And in the previous one, we have x to the 5th because we have 5 leaves. So the leading coefficient for this polynomial is always 1. So if we choose zy to be the integral domain and the prime ideal to be the ideal generated by y, the leading coefficient, the leading term is always x to the power of n, and the leading term is always 1, and 1 is not in the prime ideal. And if we and it is easy to convince you that the first leading term is the only term that doesn't contain a y variable in there, because that's the only way you can choose all the leaves without choosing any clade, and all the other terms you have to choose at least one clade. So all the other terms, its coefficients would have a y term. So that actually satisfies the second condition here. And if we take a look at the constant term, so the constant term will always have a y in there that corresponds to the root node, which basically means we're picking the whole tree as a clade, and it will always be there, and the y term will always be there for any tree. So we know that the constant term will not be in the IP, will not be in the IP square, will not be in the prime ideal square. So that is just simple proof that that these polynomials are irreducibles. And once we prove that they're irreducibles, then we know that this polynomial, this integral domain is a unique factorization domain, and we can go ahead and prove that. So for 2 rooted trees, as long as they are isomorphic. I mean, if they're the two trees are isomorphic if and only if they have the same polynomial. So, in other words, this means that this polynomial is a complete isomorphism invariant for rooted trees. All right. Well, here is something if you're interested in like number theory or something, could be interested that because of the nature of the proof, we can actually substitute the y by a prime number p, and most of the proof will still be valid. But the only problem we have is when we have a vertex of degree 2, and we'll see an example here. So when we have a vertex of degree 2, for example, we're going to have this paths in there. Then we could design two trees that are not isomorphic, and they will have a different bivariate polynomial p t1 t2 xy. But in these two cases, we can if we know that L equals for any prime number p, we can find we can just add L edges on top of the root, and so that they have the same polynomial after substituting p. So in some sense that if we substitute p in here, it's not going to distinguish these two trees with degree 2. But if we don't have any nodes of degree 2, then we're good. So especially for M-ary trees, for binary trees, for phylogenetics, we're mainly interested in binary trees, which means every node except for the root have degree 3, and say 3-ary trees. For those trees, one variable will be enough. You can substitute the y by a prime number. It'll still be a complete isomorphism environment for these trees. All right. So there is a straightforward corollary for this. So a rooted on-level tree T can be reconstructed from its set of proper primary subtrees. Well, the primary subtrees are actually the black part of the. So we have a one-to-one correspondence between the terms in polynomial and the choice of clades and leaves, and the complement of the choice of clades and leaves are so-called primary subtrees. So once we know all the primary subtrees, we actually know all the terms in the polynomial, and all we need to do is just to factor the polynomial back to its parenthesis. So minus y and factor the rest of it, and minus y factor the rest of it, and then we can reconstruct the tree structure. So in this case, we can basically reconstruct any rooted tree from its primary subtrees, which is I think it's a nice thing to know. All right, so now we have a complete isomorphism environment for rooted trees. We're going to the unrooted ones. Well, this is also like kind of straightforward, maybe a little bit uninterested, not in terms of math, but what would you do if you have many prime numbers? You would multiply them and to get composite numbers, right? So once we have all the T1, all the rooted trees that are irreducibles, what we can do is we can multiply them, and in this case, if we have an unrooted tree, we can contract its leaf edges. Like we can contract the top leaf edges, and we have T1, and we can contract the bottom two leaf edges. We have T2 and T3, and then we have three rooted trees, and all we need to do, we just multiply them, and that'll give us a unique polynomial for the unrooted tree. It is, I mean, yeah, it might not be very interested in terms of math, but it could be very useful in applications, right? And the other, oh, okay. So here are some open questions that would be interested to know. So the first question is, are there any simple conditions for a polynomial to represent a tree? Well, there is one condition that as long as you can minus y and factor it, then minus y and factor it until you get a tree structure, then you know it is it represents a tree. But are there any simpler or easy to compute conditions that tells us whether if this polynomial represents a tree? Would be nice to know, because in that case, if we know the conditions, then we can basically sample. So in application of phylogenetics, we're constantly sampling trees. We're constantly building random trees, and which is a complicated thing if we don't have a nice tool. But once we know these conditions, we can basically sampling coefficients that satisfy this condition to sample trees, and we might have a good tree sampler if we can answer this question. And the second question is that, this is from last Canada. I heard like a lot of people talking about the trees and it's and tree polynomials, and it's like zeros. I guess it would be interesting, but I didn't look into it. Well, the last one is, of course, whether if there is any connection between this polynomial and the other tree polynomials, say like subtree polynomials and chromatic symmetric functions, will be interesting to investigate. All right, so the other generalizations that are interested in application are, so in the application, we're sometimes interested in tip label trees. So this idea is simple. It's like now we can distinguish all the unlabeled trees. Then we can definitely distinguish all the partially labeled and fully labeled trees. So in this case, if we have partially labeled trees, so here is leaf labeled as x1, x2, x1, and x2, x3. So you can say it has labels 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, and then we can just basically define a similar polynomial, but just with more variables, and that'll still distinguish all the partially labeled tree, and the same for the fully labeled ones. And once we have this, we can introduce some applications. So this is on the right. This picture is a handwriting of Charles Darwin, saying that he thinks that the evolution of species is like a tree. But I'll be talking more about that. All right, so once we have a one-to-one correspondence between the polynomial and the trees, we can write the polynomials as a matrix, since it's a bivariate polynomial. And as you know, that the matrices and vectors are good formats, or good tools for data analysis. And we're basically just write the coefficients of the polynomials as a matrix, like this. And then we define a metric for unlabeled trees. So the metric is basically, we find the corresponding coefficients, and we take the absolute value of their differences and divide them by their sum, so that we have some good properties of this metric. And I'll say that later. So one thing is that the distribution of the polynomial distances between all pairs of unlabeled rooted trees are forming a perfect normal distribution. We can, so I don't know whether you can see the solid black lines here. Those are the normal fitted normal distribution. And this is good because once we compute a distance, we know how close two trees are and how far they are, whether if it is close enough or far enough. And this is actually now the case for other metrics that we use now to compare trees. So the first one is we compute the subtree distribution of a subtree size distribution. That is, like, we compute how many subtree of size k one tree have, and then we have a vector. So it has, say, one tree of size 1, two tree of size 2, something like that. So you have a vector, and then you compute the Manhattan distance of the vectors, and they only give you like 6 or 7, 8 or 8 different numbers. So you don't expect a good distribution on that. And the other one is Lewis-Morlan distance. That distance is based on the Laplacian spectrum of the trees. So first you compute the Laplacian spectrum of the trees as graphs. So you compute the Laplacian spectrum of the trees, and then they compute the Laplacian density, if I remember it correctly, and compare the density with some Shannon entropy. And that gives a sort of a good distribution, but it's not so good. I mean, it is not so good it is not a normal distribution. But for the polynomial metric that we define, it's a perfect normal distribution, which is a good thing to know. And we'll see how we can use this normal distributions. But before that, we generated 3 sets of random trees. So on the left plot here, each dot represents a tree. And each tree is generated by different tree generators. So we have Algis, PDA, and Yule. Those are 3 different tree generators, and we know they generate different tree shapes, different level trees. And we generate these 300 trees, 100 for each model, and then we compute their polynomial, and then we compute their pairwise distance, polynomial distances, and so this is very high dimensional data, and we use the multidimensional scaling to plot these data. So as you can see, the data are pretty, the polynomial distance can distinguish like which model generate these trees. And we also use a clustering, a k-modoids clustering algorithm to cluster this. And among these 3 methods, our polynomial has the lowest misclassification rates. So that is actually a very good algorithm compared to the other algorithm that we have now. So other thing we did is we actually detect, we also compute the distances between the tropical influenza trees and USA influenza trees. So all the dots on the left here are phylogenetic trees from data from DNA sequences sampled in tropical areas and in USA. So we can see that there's a clear separation between USA and tropical influenza, and also the k-modoids clustering results show that it classify 195 out of 200 tropicals in tropical and 155 of USAs in USA. But I think I don't know whether it is something about the data, because apparently USA has some places in tropical area too, like Florida or Hawaii. But it's just showing that the polynomial distance can distinguish these two types of influenza phylogenies. All right, so another example is that we have the evolution whales. The top tree is the evolution, is the phylogenetic, is the representing the evolution of whales, and the bottom one is the one we generated using one of the tree generator. It is not, well, exactly the same, but we'll show you that using that, the good thing that using the normal distribution, we know that this is actually a pretty close tree. So here on the left-hand side, I don't know, it's probably a little bit kind of hard to see, that the red spade here, it's the right diamond here is actually the original tree, the original whale tree, and then I generated 100 random trees with beta splitting model, which is a tree generator, and then we basically find the closest one, and I computed distance and compared it to the normal distribution. So we know that the distance between the simulated tree and the original tree are actually quite small. So we can say it is a good model, but it could be better. So this is just showing an example that we can also estimate the parameter that generated, because beta splitting model has one single parameter beta, and in this case the closest tree has beta equals -1. So we could probably say for the whale evolutionary tree, the beta is probably -1, but beta doesn't mean anything there. But if we're using something like birth-death model or other models, then we could get some meaningful parameter estimation. All right, do I still have time? Yeah, okay. So another thing is we're going to investigate this partially labeled trees. So partial labeled trees, we're mainly interested in leaf labeled trees. So in this case, and leaf labeled trees, and the labels can mean a lot of things. For example, can be antimicrobial resistant or not, or or where it has been sampled, like their geographic information, like where they're being sampled, and a lot of other informations. So in this case, we're basically just test how our polynomial metric can distinguish these different labels as well as the tree topologies. So in this case, we generate random trees and assign them 2 labels, blue and red, to the leaves. So the first one is we assign the labels and to the clade. So to a big clade, we assign all of them to blue, and all of the clade leaves in the clade to red. And the right one is we assign labels random. And we also generate 2 types of trees. So 2 types of trees with different topologies. So on the left-hand side is a polynomial distance between the partially labeled trees. So as you can see, the yellow ones are generated. So the color represents the tree generators that we use. So the blue ones are PDA, and yellow ones are biased. And the shape of the dot, triangles and discs, so they represent how we represent how we assign the labels. So in this case, we can see a clearly separation between the labels and as well as the tree topologies. Compared to one of the most commonly used distance nowadays in phylogenetics, it is called a Robinson-Foes distance. And we know that Robinson-Foes distance it takes the labels, it considers labels more than the topologies of the trees. So as you can see on the right-hand side, we compute the Robinson-Foes distance between the same set of trees. And it can clearly distinguish the triangles and discs because they have different labels. But among those 2 clouds, and you don't see clearly, especially on the left, you don't see the clearly distinguish between the different models or different tree topologies that that can be separated. All right, so here there should be a movie, but it cannot be played somehow. All right, so in this example, we're basically talking about cell lineages. That is how one cell dividing and differentiating into multiple cells, and that can be that whole process can be represented by a tree. So now we have two worms. So C. elegans is the round worm, and the P. mariana is another type of worm. I don't know. I don't remember which one it is. And now we have record of how they dividing and differentiating into different organs and different organs of cells, different part of cells. And the labels here, and tip labels here, are actually telling us what kind of cell it is, whether it is a muscle cell, it is a neural cell, or it is some cells in the organ, or other type of cells. So the color represents the type of cells. And now the thing is, we want to compare these two. These two cell lineage development, and we want to find which organ in one worm corresponds to the other organ in the other worm. So in this case, we can use the polynomial for leaf label trees and compute the minimum distance between these subtrees, these organs, and then try to align them. So this is a picture after the alignment. We find most of them are correctly aligned. That is showing another application of the polynomial. All right, so lastly, I want to talk some applications to linguistics. So one thing I looked into is the parallel universal dependencies. So the dependency theory saying that all the sentences are built around verbs. So in this case, verbs are basically the root. So say we have this sentence: the scheme makes money through sponsorship and advertising, and that is the sentence that we have. And the parallel universal means that we actually translate this sentence into other different languages. Say we have French down there, but I don't know how to read it. So different languages will have a different dependency structures for this sentence. And what we do is we compute basically 1,000 sentences and compute the distance. Well, this is like bipartite distance. So this is, as you know, this is a fully labeled trees, and the labels are the things in the parentheses, whether if it's objective or or whether if it is subjective, or those are the labels. We have a bunch of labels, and so we are dealing with the fully labeled trees here. And for fully labeled trees, we basically give it a new metric or new distance. This is a semi-metric. It is not really satisfying the triangular inequality. But I'm not going to talk about this here. But the results is that we compute 1,000. First, we use 1,000 sentences that has a parallel translations, and we compute the distance between these languages. And then we basically have it's kind of hard to see, a visualization of the distances between the languages. And the languages well, I talked to some linguistics, and they say this kind of makes sense. Say the French and the Italian are similar to each other, and German and English are similar to each other. And one thing for all that Japanese is really distinct, is really different from all the other languages. That is also one observation that linguistics found using other methods. All right, yeah, that'll be all of my talk. Thanks.
Thank you, Pengyu. Let's unmute and thank Pengyu for his very nice talk.
Thanks.
Any question?
I have a quick question. Am I unmuted? Yeah, okay. Well, I really enjoyed this polynomial that you constructed, and this this sort of curious fact that that the rooted tree is determined by the sort of this clave and leave count. So, as much as I like the algebraic proof, I'm also like, I'm curious. Do you have is it a sort of an easy thing to prove? So you have this kind of algebraic proof based on this polynomial irreducibility, or this unique factorization that that your polynomial uniquely determines the tree, and therefore each rooted tree is uniquely determined by this kind of clave and leaf count.
Yeah.
So what I'm curious is, have you looked at proving that more directly? I mean, do you have another proof that a rooted tree is uniquely determined by those counts?
No. So let me slide back to. For my, are you asking that whether if there is another proof of that, given all the, what is this going?
Further back, this fact that a tree is uniquely determined by. Sorry, I've forgotten your language exactly, but it's
yeah. Oh, yeah. So you're asking, once you know all the terms, or all the primary subtrees, or all the choices of clades and leaves, can we prove that the tree can be uniquely represented by this?
Right.
Well, yeah, that's a good question. Well, the short answer is I don't know. But no, I didn't try to prove it in this way. But it could be an interesting.
So there might also be. I mean, it's certainly a nice. It's really appealing proof of this fact to just appeal to this unique factorization.
Yes. So yeah, I guess some kind of a reconstruction techniques could be used to prove in that sense. Right. But yeah, I guess my proof are mostly based on algebraic, the algebraic factor of it. But yeah, it would be nice to know whether if there is a more direct, like graph theoretic proof.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know that was true, but I mean, I'm not like I'm some expert on this or something, but it surprised me, and your proof is very appealing. Yeah. But it also makes me curious if there are other ways to sort of see that more directly. I mean, this is less of a real. I mean, you were kind of aimed at applications when you were constructing this polynomial. I mean, is there some? Is there some? I mean, I'm trying to get in your process a little bit. I mean, what prompted you to define this polynomial? I mean, you were somehow trying to get what makes this a good polynomial to capture the things that you want? Maybe that's
yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, so that I guess that could be a good story for me. So I studied knot theory when I was in graduate school. Okay. So yeah, so I basically studied those things like Jones polynomials, and I know that the polynomials can be a good thing to capture the structure of the discrete structures, the properties of discrete structures, right? So this polynomial is sort of inspired by the Jones polynomials and Humphrey polynomials. So you can do those. So Jones polynomials can be considered as chromatic polynomials. You can define it by doing deletion and contraction. Right. So yeah, I was trying to trying to think in that direction at first, but then I don't know. I somehow found this is more, it works. It's I guess it's easier than doing that, and then somehow the definitions satisfy all the Eisenstein's criterion, and that just and that just happened. Yeah, I guess it's probably inspired by those polynomials, like graph polynomials, especially. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you.
Probably, can I ask a few questions, if you don't mind?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. If I understood correctly, these the every polynomial generated here with a root, they are irreducible, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So the unrooted one, I forgot exactly how you created them, but they can be reducible.
They're all reducible. I mean, they are just like composite numbers in integers, and the rooted one are like prime numbers in integers. Yeah.
Right, but how you created this polynomial t? That's not that's definitely can be factorized.
Oh, yeah. So you basically find all the leaf edges. So in this case, for t, it's the top one. So you basically locate all the 3 leaves, and then you just contract. The leaf edge, the edge that is incident to the leaf, and you basically contract it, and consider the contracted node as the root of that tree. So for example, the T1 is basically contract the top 2 nodes, and then consider that that is the root of the tree. And for T2 and T3, we're contracting the bottom 2 edges. And then we have 3 rooted tree here, and all you need to do is just multiply them.
Oh, and anyway, that's not the question I wanted to ask. I was wondering what the matrix you defined at the very beginning, like what are you actually measuring?
The metric?
Yeah, so could you go back to the slide that you have?
Like this one?
No, not here. Probably here. So what's going on? Like, no, the other guy with the matrix definition. I was trying to understand, right? So what are you measuring? What's the difference? Are you measuring the terms in the polynomial?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, the difference is the is how similar are the 2 tree topologies are. Yeah. So if the distance is small, if the distance is 0, it tells us that the 2 trees are isomorphic to each other. And right. And if the distance is small, then it means that they have the same. So we hope that they have the same similar tree shapes, because we don't really have a ground truth for this. Like if I give you 2 trees, how would you say they're similar or not? Like if I give you these 2 trees, I mean, some people would say, oh, they look similar, but some people would say they're not really similar, because if you look at the details, there is a small clade there and there is small clade there. Like, yeah, there is really no ground truth like how similar 2 trees are. We're basically but in general, we have this task in applications to compare to phylogenetic trees, to compare how their the patterns of their evolutions, and also what I said there, like the patterns of the cell development. So we need at least something to compare, and it seems that the polynomial is doing a good job here, because for all the experiments that we did, and And to answer your question, this metric is basically measuring how similar those tree topologies are, or how those unlabeled trees are. Yeah, I'm not sure whether that answers your question.
No, but it doesn't satisfy me at all. Sorry.
Okay. Yes.
It doesn't matter. We can talk sometime later. So the trees can be regenerated. How? Like given a polynomial?
Oh, yeah. So for example, let's go back to this one. So if you have all the, let's say, so you have all the choices of clades and leaves, then you have all the terms. And all you need to do is just subtract y. So we have this 5 term on top of this tree. And all you need to do is just subtract y, and then you left 4 terms. And then you factor these 4 terms into, since we're dealing with, I mean, now, since you know there are 2 clades, and you know that they can be, well, it's not really the direction of the logic, but you try to factor it, and after you factor it, you find there are 2 factors, and you know that there are 2 clades under the root. So if you minus y, then the first 4 terms can be factored into x cubed plus y times x squared plus y, x cubed plus y times x squared plus y, and then you subtract y inside those inside the parentheses, and then you have x times x times x, and you have x squared times x squared, and then actually the parenthesis that gives you the tree structure, which actually is called the Dick number. DYCK, the Dick, not the Dick number, but the Dick representation, or yeah.
I mean, each time you have to do a factorization, right? That's kind of a lot of work. You subtract y and then do a factorization.
Yeah, right, exactly. So that's why I was asking whether if there is a simpler, simple way to determine whether if that polynomial represent a tree or not, a simpler conditions. Because every time if you do that every time, especially if you have a big tree, then it's going to be tons of work, of course. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's all my question.
Okay.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. If we have no further question, let's start the second part, the sharing session. Please, Pengyu.
Well, okay, yeah.